Good morning, everyone. So when I walked in with this morning with Zev was afraid that there's nobody in the hall. So I said, in India, everybody comes in at the right time, and we have a pretty good, almost full audience here. So Zev, good number of people to listen to us. So yeah, go ahead.
I want to say that when I look at the audience, I realize that the ministers are mostly not here, and now we have the hardcore business people.
Zev, welcome to Karnataka and Bangalore, the home of coffee, I would like to argue. So this is coming home kind of thing for you.
You know, when I was invited to be here, I did my research. All good entrepreneurs do research. And I was so happy to learn that this is a coffee center and that there are many coffee roasting companies and coffee bars, and that excellent coffee comes from here. That was a bonus for me.
So Zev, I think a lot of people have, of course, heard of Starbucks, but the origins of Starbucks and the early days is not something a lot of us are familiar with. And I was just doing my own research on your background and your early days as a teacher. So talk about entrepreneurs coming from different backgrounds, right? So somebody who was started out as a teacher, but what got you started as an entrepreneur in the early days?
The question is, what got me started as an entrepreneur? I went to college, and after college I became a teacher. In the public schools, my students were 13 and 14 years old. After 3 years, I was like most entrepreneurs, I was getting restless. I wanted a little bit more from life. And I had two friends, Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker, who also were getting restless. And the three of us at that time were 26 years old. So we started talking about how we were going to change our life. And we decided that the way to change our life was to start a business. Now, this is not like the year 2022. This was 1970, more than 50 years ago. And there was no entrepreneurship ecosystem. You had to do it yourself. The idea, we had a list of ideas. Most of them were just terrible. But on that list was gourmet coffee roasting. Coffee was pretty terrible in Seattle. So, we looked at each idea and said, well, is this a good idea? Is it going to be profitable? Are we the right people for each idea? And we decided that after doing our research that the idea of becoming a coffee roaster was probably the best idea for us. But of course, we loved good coffee, but we didn't know nothing about the coffee business. So we did what you would do. What would you do? You would find an expert to coach you. And we found a wonderful man who became an uncle to us, and he helped us learn about the coffee industry. We loved him, he loved us, and he made it possible for us to move into the coffee industry really easily. So that's how the idea happened.
So then fast forward. Fast forward.
Hang on. Have some more.
Fast forward one decade, you actually became a barista, right? And that's when you actually got on board Howard Schultz.
Yep.
And
So,
from those days, right, till between when you started and when you got, what were some of the early lessons on how you built the brand and how the whole thing evolved from being a coffee roasting company to a barista?
So we're talking now about the first decade of Starbucks after the initial startup. Now, I just want to remind you that we're talking here about the 1970s. When we started Starbucks, nobody had a computer. Think about that. I mean, that's a long time ago. So during that 10 years, Starbucks grew to become sort of a powerhouse company, but only in Seattle. During that time, in about 1982, Starbucks was big enough to have a director of sales and marketing. And the company hired a man who was living in New York, and his name is Howard Schultz. Of course, today Howard Schultz is famous, but he wasn't famous in 1982. And he came to work for the company. He was fabulous, just a fabulous guy. And Howard Schultz, about 2 years later, became the founder's exit strategy. This is the kind of person that you want to have around you, somebody who is smart enough and aggressive enough to help you with the exit. I'm going to simplify the story because we don't have enough time, but eventually Mr. Schultz and some angel investors purchased Starbucks from the original founders, and everybody was happy. The three founders started doing other things, and Mr. Schultz started building the Starbucks coffee company that we know today. And the first thing he did was change the logo from brown to green. And the second thing he did was to change from selling coffee beans to selling beverages. This was the beginning of the modern Starbucks. This kind of exit strategy is something that you could never put in a business plan. When you are marketing shares to angel investors, they always ask you, well, what's your exit strategy? And you say, somebody's going to acquire us someday. That's really what people say. And in our case, we had no idea that Mr. Schultz was going to be able to put together enough money to acquire our company. I'm really glad he did.
Just a little bit of a tough question here. Would you like to maybe have a partial exit then and not a complete exit?
The question is, why did we sell?
Right.
Yeah, okay. This is a question that has an unusual answer. So we know Starbucks today, all of us, 300 stores in India, 32,000 stores, just like the stores in India, around the world. It's an amazing company. I'm sorry.
Would you like to have a partial exit?
So the question is, thank you. The question is, well, why didn't we keep some shares? And the answer is, my partners and I are early stage guys. I have never started a company that I didn't sell within 5 years. So you might say, oh, you idiot, Zev, you should have kept those shares. But I don't feel that way. I know who I am. I'm an early stage entrepreneur, like many of you, and I wouldn't pretend to be a corporate executive. I don't know how to do that. So that's the answer to the question, why did we sell?
Some lessons that you have seen in, maybe you were not there in Starbucks, but as Starbucks grew and built their brand, anything that you have then later taken on as key lessons for other brands that you then built?
The brand building at Starbucks really began with myself and my two partners, and then it accelerated during the Howard Schultz era. We had certain principles that developed the brand. No compromise on the quality of the coffee. We tried to be the best way we possibly could. Add value from the consumer's point of view in every way you can think of. Make it a place that you really want to go to. Be very careful about your brand, not from your point of view, but from your customer's point of view. How do you want the customers to perceive you? The founders wanted the customers to perceive our company as a source of good coffee, accurate information about coffee, and an interesting experience. It was fun to go to our store and talk coffee with our sales clerks, a lot of fun. During the Howard Schultz era, starting in the mid-1980s, these things just became stronger. The team that has been running the company for the last 40 years, it's been a changing team, very devoted to the customer experience. And of course, we all benefit from that. When you go into the Starbucks, any Starbucks store in India or in China, it's a great experience. Sometimes they know your name or your drink, and you can talk, and your friends are there, and it's a beautiful store. Well, these are all things that began very early with the founders and have only gotten better and stronger with the help of professional management.
So Zev, we have been going through a similar journey of brand building in India. We were mostly mass market brands in this country. It's only in the last 10, 15 years that more purpose-built brands are being built for the middle class, for slightly the upper middle class. And this is called the D2C era in India, the direct-to-consumer era. You've been around the city and you've been looking, and post Starbucks, you built new brands. What's your view on the white spaces in brands and trends that could be opportunities for entrepreneurs in a country like India? And is it an evergreen thing to keep building new brands and new brands replace old brands? So what's some thought on this?
Well, the question is having to do with the building of new brands in India. Before I answer that question, I want to say there has never been a more professional job of brand building than the state of Karnataka. I mean, look at this event. This event is incredible. And it is just one of the many things that the state of Karnataka is doing to build itself up. For example, in the tourism sector, many of you may not know this, but the tourism ministry is always promoting and going to trade shows all over the world to promote your state. So you might think about that, about how did they do that? How did they make Karnataka look so fabulous? So going back to this business to consumer space, you know, building brands is really something I believe for entrepreneurs. You need professional help. You have good instincts, you know who your customers might be, but the brand building, you really need somebody who has a broader insight. So maybe you have a friend who will help you for free. Maybe you join an accelerator where some of the people who volunteer their time at the accelerator will help you. There are many ways to solve that problem, to get professional help without spending a fortune in money. And you know, some of the factors in building a brand, in establishing a market position are known to many of us here. You have to be consistent. You have to know who your intended audience is. You have to understand them. By the way, for startup entrepreneurs who are here, as I said yesterday, the best way to understand your audience is to do focus groups. Because if you think about it, if you're a startup entrepreneur, you think you know what your potential customers want, but you don't. You just have your own ideas about what you want, and you try to project that onto the potential customers. So I think you need to be very careful to understand what customers want. In the early days of Starbucks, we had a secret weapon, and that was the co-founder named Gordon Bowker. Gordon Bowker understands marketing and especially how to position a company so it will be perceived correctly by the people that we wanted to be our customers. So you need to think about that. One of the problems with early stage companies is that the people who run them are very product oriented. You just love your new software. You love the platform that you and your team built, but maybe you're not so good at thinking about marketing.
So just talking about trends, after Starbucks, what are the kind of companies you continue to invest in, and is it mostly been consumer companies? That's your sweet spot?
So the question is about what's hot right now?
Yes.
Okay. For those of you who are going to be raising a seed round or maybe even a pre-seed round of investment, or perhaps a little later a Series A, it becomes important really quick. What's hot? Prashant's organization does a lot of early stage investing, and he's very careful about that, because sometimes what's hot, for instance, the metaverse, artificial intelligence. Investors love to hear those terms. Oh, you're doing something in the metaverse. Oh, you're doing something with artificial intelligence. They think that's really cool. But the truth is that there are lots of other kinds of companies, software as a service, SaaS, still a very strong field. Business to consumer platforms, really strong. But they're not hot. They're not the latest, greatest thing. So why is this a problem? Well, if you're a startup entrepreneur, it is a problem because when you talk to the investor and you're not doing something in the metaverse and you're not doing something with AI, the investor says, go away. I can't talk to you. So that's a big problem. Smart people like Prashant and many other very savvy and intelligent investors don't get trapped by what's hot.
Just as a space, direct-to-consumer platforms is hot. Yeah. So we are a brand deficit country, Zev, right? So we have not created many exciting brands. It's just that now that we have seen brands like Starbucks and some of these globally, we are seeing more exciting brands being built in this country. So it's really a very fertile and very exciting time for entrepreneurs who want to build brands.
I want to say, in response to what Prashant just said, there has never been a better time than now to be an entrepreneur. And the state of Karnataka is a pretty good place to be an entrepreneur. Why do I say this? We're in the post-COVID era now, right? Nobody's wearing a mask. So there's a lot of excitement. People can go out again. Investors are being active again. In addition, this is a little bit more technical and specific. There's greater access to investors for entrepreneurs. Why is that? Why is it so much easier to get to talk to investors? It's because of the media that are available for you to contact them, and also the use of Zoom. You can contact almost anybody in the world now using InMail, and then you can set up a Zoom appointment with them. And it is amazing what an effect this has had. I'm not sure about Indian entrepreneurs, but in Mexico, for example, I go to Mexico pretty often. A lot of entrepreneurs are tired of the very conservative investors in Mexico. So they're starting to make appointments online with investors in the United States. They're jumping over the Mexican entrepreneurs and going international. This is only possible because of the new media that are available.
Talking of post-COVID era opportunities, what were the new trends that you saw and opportunities for consumer brands in the post-COVID era? Any interesting ideas that you've seen?
Everybody loves to talk about how terrible the pandemic was. Oh, it just killed businesses, right? We all had to stay home. The economy stopped. That's not 100% true, my friends. There were winners during COVID. In India, the companies that manufacture bicycles for export, bicycles became very popular in many countries because it was something you could do outdoors. It was safe during COVID. In many countries, the pet industry, people with expensive dogs and cats, the pet industry just took off. In the United States, the big box pet stores like Petco increased their sales volume 25% in 2 years. 25%. So there have been some winners during this period. It's not all bad news. And as a result, now that COVID is over, those industries, also I want to include the remodeling industry and the construction industry, because everybody was stuck at home, so they improved their house. IKEA, the international direct-to-consumer company that sells all kinds of furniture, IKEA loved COVID. Why? Because we all went out and bought a desk so we could work at home. So there have been winners, and there are many companies right now who are very strong right now. They have a lot of cash. Now, there are, of course, the restaurant industry. Oh, that's terrible. They were really hurt. Many went out of business. And there are other types of companies that also were hurt. But remember, during COVID, not everybody died.
Zev, talking about multi-generational nature of companies, now Starbucks is a 5-decade company, and there's also a very inorganic aspect to how companies get built through acquisitions, and a lot of us don't look at that as a strategy. But for Starbucks, that has been an interesting way in which I don't think a lot of people know that. So was that a strategy to build through acquisitions, or did it just happen organically?
Starbucks and Microsoft, which are both in Seattle, by the way, their headquarters. And also, I want to say that Starbucks and Microsoft now have CEOs that are Indian Americans. Yeah, it's impressive. Both of these companies, you know, when we look at them from outside, we think, oh, they must be geniuses. They always seem to have the right products, the right people. They must be growing it all from inside, right? No. Microsoft, in particular, when they see an industry that they want to get into, like the online gaming, they just buy companies. It's just a common way of growth at Microsoft. So is that good or bad? Well, if you own one of those companies that Microsoft wants to buy, it's pretty good news. You have an exit strategy. Not only will they buy your company, they'll retain the senior management on contracts for a year or two, and you'll be earning much more money than you used to pay yourself. In the case of Starbucks, Starbucks is one of those companies that looks like everything came from inside the company. It's not true. Starbucks has acquired dozens of companies. Tazo Tea, which is one of their house brands. Tazo Tea was an independent company in Portland, Oregon, a good one, and Starbucks eliminated its own tea, purchased Tazo, and made that the Starbucks tea brand, Tazo Tea. This is in North America, at least. When Starbucks was first doing its global growth across the United States and then to Japan and the United Kingdom, one of the aspects of their global growth was to acquire companies. For instance, in Japan, they did not acquire a company. They did a joint venture, and that's how they entered Japan, I think, in 1999. In the United Kingdom, it was different. In the United Kingdom, some people from Seattle, when they realized what Howard Schultz was doing, moved immediately to London and set up a company just like Starbucks, and they called it Seattle Coffee, which is very funny. They opened 50 locations. So Starbucks wanted to enter the London market a few years later, and they looked at it and said, yeah, I guess we could compete with them, but why don't we just buy them? So they purchased Seattle Coffee, changed all their locations to Starbucks Coffee. The people who had owned that company retired and had a great life. Now they've opened a pizza chain in Seattle. So these are examples of acquisitions. They've also acquired a music company, a data processing company, all kinds of organizations. But as consumers, we never see that. But acquisition is one of the great ways to grow. Many of the companies that Prashant's organization has funded have either been acquired by a bigger company or become a bigger company and acquired smaller companies. This is the way of the world, and it is not a bad thing for entrepreneurs. It's a good thing.
Zev, coming to the topic a little bit more of innovation. And so innovation was a very North America, Valley-centric activity 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago. But there's been a lot of dispersion of innovation to China and more recently Israel and more recently now India. Do you see this as a continuing trend, and will this be a more democratic distribution of innovation over time?
Yes, I do. Let's see, I give talks online about once every 60 days. And as a result of those talks, people contact me sometimes, and then I start, we'll have 3 meetings on Zoom where we talk about what their problems are. These people are startup entrepreneurs. So I have a feeling for what's going on, not only in my own country, but in many other countries. And I can definitely agree that innovation is very dispersed. Of course, India and North America and some places in Europe, like Berlin, big center of innovation. These locations are going to continue. I mean, they have a head start on everybody else. But you wouldn't believe what's happening in Mexico. I mean, the Mexican entrepreneurs are just amazing. And they don't have the environment that you have in Karnataka. They have to struggle a little bit more. So I would say that the dispersal is going to continue. One of the countries that I've been thinking about lately is Vietnam. Vietnam is a really interesting nation, very entrepreneurial. They've become a very big deal in coffee. They have a lot of coffee plantations now in the last 15 years. I'm wondering if we're going to start to see more about what's going on in Saigon in the future. I think Saigon might become like a new Berlin.
I think talking about the whole China and beyond China and the China plus one strategy in, let's say, take an area like manufacturing, right? I know that you've done a startup in the manufacturing space. Do you see now the more, more of a trend to redistribute manufacturing to countries like China, Vietnam and Karnataka right here?
During COVID, we all know that there was a problem with the distribution of parts and finished products. Transportation kind of broke down, so the supply chain became a problem. The country that had more trouble than anyone with the supply chain is my country, the United States. It was horrible. I can give you an example. If Oh, I'll pick on my daughter. My daughter needed a new refrigerator, so she went to the nice distributor of refrigerators in Seattle, and they said, oh, yeah, this is the model you want. And she said, okay. And they said, when will it be delivered? And they said, in 4 months.
Yeah.
This is what was going on in the United States. Now, that's just my daughter. What about General Motors, which makes many car brands? They are having a horrible time, especially with microchips. So this distribution problem caused a national crisis in the United States. The federal government, for once in the United States, stepped in and allocated billions of dollars to build 2 microchip plants in the middle of the United States. And they did that because they were big business, like General Motors, for example, were so upset that they were dependent on China, and that China was, during the pandemic, unable to fulfill many orders. The lockdowns in China were serious. So now you see this movement away from dependence on China. Since I've been here in Bangalore, I've been thinking that's probably a good thing for Bangalore, because one of the obvious choices if a company wants to be less dependent on China is to build a factory in Bangalore.
Right. What about your own experience with manufacturing and the startup that you have in manufacturing?
Well, we talked a few minutes ago about what's really sexy, hot, in business. The metaverse, for example. What's not sexy? Manufacturing. When you say manufacturing to an investor, you're going to put them to sleep. They just go, oh, don't make me talk about manufacturing. And why do they say that? Because manufacturing not only is not hot, it takes a lot of money. Manufacturing is expensive. You need inventory, you need a factory floor, you need technicians. By comparison, starting a software company takes much less money. One of the companies that I talk to about once a quarter is a manufacturing company. This is a really interesting story because it has some other ramifications, some other lessons. The company, I can name it, it's called Voga Coffee, V-O-G-A, Voga Coffee. But they are a manufacturing company. Voga Coffee is in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley world. It's a very small company, maybe 20 employees. And they are manufacturers of an innovative coffee machine. It costs about $8,000. The customers are coffee bars and restaurant chains. So it's a business-to-business manufacturing company. This is not something that investors get very excited about. They just raised $1 million. Now, how did they do that? They had gone through a pre-seed round, a seed round. Now the sort of a seed round 2 is $1 million. One investor took half of that round, $500,000. Why did he do that? There were several reasons that made Voga Coffee attractive to him, and we all should pay attention to this. Number one, the CEO has a law degree, and for 5 years he evaluated deals for an investor. He worked for a man like this man, and so he got an education in how to position a company to investors and all of the aspects of equity offerings. This makes him a special guy. He also is incredibly passionate about coffee. Another reason why this investor invested, and this is a really, I almost hate to tell you this story. This investor is in Silicon Valley. He has an office in one of the 4-floor office buildings where half the money in the world is. And on the ground floor of this building, there's a really good coffee bar. It's sort of like the coffee company here, Ground Up, if you've ever been there. It's like that. So this guy just loves going to this coffee bar. So when he was approached about investing in a company that is manufacturing coffee equipment, he was willing to listen even though it was manufacturing. So there are special ways that you can appear to be hot when you're really just in the manufacturing business.
Great, Zev. That's very encouraging. I think there is a lot of innovation even in manufacturing, right? Nothing stays constant there, and I think there's a big opportunity for India and Karnataka in the next decade to be leaders in manufacturing innovation. Maybe this is my last question. Why didn't you look at investing as a career?
Well, Prashant is asking me, why didn't I do what he did? He had a successful company, and then he became a seed investor. Very unusual for a VC level investor to specialize in seed rounds. So why didn't I do that? Again, I want to say that everyone in this room, including me, is good at something. And there is something that was a theory that was popular some years ago called the Peter Principle. And the Peter Principle says that everybody who's good will keep getting promoted until they fail. You know, you're good at this, okay, we're going to move you up and you'll be good at that. And okay, you're good again, so we'll move you up and eventually you'll fail, right? Because you really aren't that good at doing that new job. I've always been very afraid of the Peter Principle. There's some things that I'm really good at, very early stage companies. That's my number one. And I felt that establishing a fund to invest would be outside of my expertise. And I also very much, as some of you already know, I really sympathize and put myself in the shoes of early stage entrepreneurs. I love working with them. I love helping them avoid the mistakes that other people have made. So I have always, as my wife says, Zev, you never grew up. I've always been at the new venture level.
Zev, this is really the last question. A personal habit, a good personal habit that you wish you had developed earlier. A good personal habit that you wish you had developed much earlier in life.
I'm not sure I understand.
A good personal habit.
Oh, a good personal habit. I'm sorry, I just couldn't quite hear it. Well, as some of you have discovered, I'm a very open guy. I like to talk, I like to listen to people. So, you know, when people come up to me and they want me to say something, I always turn it around and get them to talk. What are you doing? Tell me about your company, that kind of thing. And I would say that that is a really good personal habit for business people, to learn to listen. You know, I can tell you from my personal experience, because I talk to, in a normal day, I talk to 2 or 3 early stage companies somewhere in the world using Zoom. And I would say about 70% of the time I'm listening, not talking. Tell me about this, tell me about that. And they tell me, you can't believe what an expert I've become by listening. I really have acquired quite a bit of knowledge. And I think that that's a good personal habit for all of us. If you're in talking with someone who might be helpful to you and you are doing the talking, that's a mistake. You should be listening. Let them do the talking, because you might learn something.
Thank you, Zev. This was really good fun. And thanks for being in Bangalore and Karnataka. And look forward to having you here again in our state. Thank you.
You're welcome. Karnataka looks like the future to me. Thank you.